Hello, everyone, and welcome to the press conference for On the Road. Quite a few people with us today, and I will start by introducing the people who are behind the camera. As bookends, as it were, producers Roman Coppola, Nathanael Karmitz, Charles Gilibert. There's another producer
Rebecca
with us.
Rebecca Yeldam, who is in front of us here. Thank you.
Stand up, take a bow, lady. Out, please. You deserve it. At the center of the table, he was in Cannes in 2004 with Motorcycle Diaries, in 2006 for his segment of Paris Je t'aime, in 2008 for Ligne de Passe, director Walter Salles. Since this is based on Jack Kerouac's book, we might as well start with Jack Kerouac. Sell Paradise in the book. In real life, Jack Kerouac, Mr. Sam Riley. On the other side of director Walter Salles, as Dean Moriarty in the book, Neal Cassady in real life, Mr. Garrett Hedlund. Sitting next to him as Mary Lou, Luann Henderson, Miss Kristen Stewart. Sitting next to Mr. Riley as Camille, Carolyn Cassidy, Miss Kirsten Dunst. As Carlo Marx, in real life, Allen Ginsberg, Tom Sturridge. As Ed Dunkel, in real life, Al Hinkle, Mr. Danny Morgan. And last but definitely not least, as Old Bull Lee, William Burroughs, Mr. Viggo Mortensen. And I guess I'll direct the first question to both Mr. Salles and the producers. There seems to be a renaissance of Jack Kerouac these days. Books are coming out, the scrolls have been rediscovered, exhibition and shows everywhere. It took decades to bring this film to the screen. What is it that makes it so contemporary that we have this cultural agitation around Kerouac today? And since it took decades for the film to come to life, would you, particularly the producers, take us through, synopsisize, of course, the decades that it took to bring the film to the screen?
Walter, you want to begin with the interesting Kerouac?
I think you can start, and
I'll just jump in. You know, from my perception, it seems like Kerouac never went away. The book has always been perennial. It's continued to always be discovered by a new generation. So it seems to me it's just always there. Quickly, the story behind the film, from a production point of view, is my dad bought the rights in 1979 and aspired to make the movie. There are many different filmmakers who have tried their hand, and screenwriters, and over 30 years. And it was not until Walter raised his hand and said, "I think I can make this movie." We said, "Of course." And Walter's such a natural filmmaker to take this material on, and with the script that he cooked up, it was so evident that this was the right way to go. So it took 30 years, but then it was such a natural fit with Walter, and of course, the production was lifted off the ground with Rebecca and MK2's great dedication, and that's the nutshell version of how the movie came to life.
And when did you guys jump in? Quand êtes-vous entré dans le jeu?
C'est arrivé assez rapidement, puisqu'en fait...
Well, quite quickly, in fact, because we met Walter in Paris for a totally different reason, and at the end of a long appointment, he handed over an envelope with the screenplay, and then things moved very fast. As of the next day, Walter showed us all the research work he'd done on the film. And 7 months later, well, 1 week later, we were in Los Angeles, and 7 months later, we were on the set. So suddenly, everything settled into place. I think it was about 2 years ago that all this happened. First question?
Hi, my name is Catherine Beauchamp. I'm working for Mini Medias in Montreal. So I come from Montreal, where you shot the movie. I saw that Vigo has the Canadian hockey team flag in his hand. I know that you live in an apartment just to have the perfect synergy together. The question is for both Christians and the people who speak French as well. How was your experience in Montreal?
I've worked in Montreal many times, but I only shot a few days in Montreal and San Francisco, but I've done many films there. But in the dead of winter, which isn't always the best time of year. But it's a wonderful city, and yeah, I know that city pretty well now.
Montreal was where we started. It was conception. That was like, I mean, you know, I'm usually pretty self-conscious about running around a town with my face hanging out, and I didn't care at all because I was with these guys. I was just like, whatever. So I really loved it. I got to live more in those 4 weeks than typically, like, you know, for me in my normal life, like in a lifetime. So it's great.
Yeah, I'd like to add something. It's that the film was shot throughout almost 100,000 kilometers. We went really far to capture the last frontier that is described in the book. There are several reasons for that. First, because we did a very extensive research before shooting the feature film. When Roman and I first talked, what I proposed was to do a documentary in search of the possible film. And for 5 years, intermittently, I retraced the routes of On the Road by interviewing the characters of the book who were alive, the poets from that unique generation that completely altered the face of not only North American culture, but culture in general. And also, we also interviewed people like, from David Byrne to Wim Wenders, who were very influenced by the writings not only of Kerouac, but of the Beat generation in general. So when we got to Montreal, we extended this research to the actors, and we created kind of a camp where scholars, but also members of the families that are represented in the book, Carolyn Cassidy's son, for instance, John Cassidy, came and talked extensively to the whole group, and we had met, Garrett and I had met him before in San Francisco, but he was very instrumental not only in talking about or sharing information, inside information about his father, and playing the guitar, jamming the guitar with Garrett, but he also told us that this is not a story about the Beat generation. It is what precedes it. It's about the formative years of that generation. And listening to John Cassidy saying that we already, of course, had the intuition of that, but listening from somebody from within was very, very important. In this sense, what we are portraying in the film has a correlation with the Motorcycle Diaries, which is about the very beginning of a social and political awakening as two young men discover a physical and human geography that was foreign to them. And here, it's about a group that is going from that journey from youth to the beginning of adulthood, who try to find all the possible freedoms that were denied to them, and in doing so, will ultimately expand the frontiers of the culture in a country that was very conservative, Second World War America. So the Montreal for us, getting back to your question, was also the point of where we could concentrate and study. We call it the boot camp. And for 4 weeks, we screened films about the period, not only the Cassavetes, but Shirley Clarke films, for instance. First films like The Exiles, which is a fantastic film from the early 50s that UCLA has, remastered, restored recently. Documentaries on Mingus and other masters of jazz, and we saw so many things, and then we tried to forget them all and recreate our own story on the screen. But the idea was to gain an almost three-dimensional understanding of those characters, because we have a lot of images from this group from the Beat generation when they are in their 30s, and that iconography is sometimes misleading because you're having the representation of intellectuals, people who have already complété une journée, completed a journey. They are not in the search of who they would be. And here, it's about the loss of innocence. It's about the search of that last frontier that they will never find. It's about, as Anne Charter says, it's about also discovering that this is the end of the road and the end of the American dream. So we were very, very lucky to be in the calm of Montreal and to be able to prepare this film. For many of us, it's an 8-year-old journey. It took 8 years to get to here, to be able to talk to you guys. For many of the actors who were invited in 2005, I think, Kristen, was it 2005? Yeah, 7 years ago. Kristen, 2006, I think, 2006, 2007. So you see, this project started very, very early on, and it crystallized through time.
If I may jump in before we take a question from over there, the question is to you, Garrett. Could you get a little bit more into the detail of the conversation you might have had with John Cassidy? And in order to sort of get closer to the character you were about to portray, one thing that, for instance, that struck me was Neal Cassidy is never still. You're never still in the movie, ever, if memory serves. Was that one of the hooks that allowed you to hang your entire and build the entire performance of Cassidy? And I would extend the same question to the actors.
First off, John Cassidy is never still as well. It was really important for me. The trip that Walter and I took to San Francisco to meet with him was, very beneficial because I'd went with a notepad full of questions. And you have Neal Cassidy's son there for 5 hours to rap and to ask the questions. And sort of towards the end of it, he says something about his father, and he's doing this, and I say, well, yeah, John, you see, blah, blah. And he's like, that's very good. So when you have that sort of initial stamp just within, something within that, just a trait, a characteristic, that was, wonderful. But we also got to meet, guys like Michael McClure, kind of beat writers that were very much within this realm to sort of sit there and see what they had to offer. And I'd spent a day with Carolyn Cassidy, who's, still going strong and has such a wonderful, vivid memory of who her husband was. And so it was through these guys' stories that you got to sort of understand a soul that's maybe not portrayed as much in the book. John had talked about, that Jack wrote this and Jack wrote that, but, my dad was such a loving father. Like, we loved him so much. Like, he would come home and, he would put me and Kathy and Jamie on his arms and lift us up on his bicep, and we'd roll around in the yard, and then, you know, he'd tell other fun stories about riding in the car with him, thinking he was smoking a Camel cigarette, but it smelled a little bit funnier than that. And so it was just a wonderful thing having John around, him and I becoming buddies, and he was a wonderful sort of co-pilot within this adventure.
Mr. Riley?
What was the question?
What was the hook that allowed you to hang and build your entire performance or approach Jack Kerouac? The one element that made it all come together.
Well, that's very difficult to answer. There wasn't really one thing. It was, as Walter said, it was a sort of, it grew over the course of the 4 weeks in the boot camp. He also had things to say about Jack, did John Cassidy. I don't know if there was one thing, really. We smoked the same cigarettes.
That smelled funny.
No. Not at all.
Okay. Miss Stewart, Miss Dunst.
Luann's daughter came to visit us as well. Anne-Marie Santos spent a day sitting on a porch with me. It kind of goes back to what Garrett was saying, just about, it kind of sometimes is more about a feeling. It's not necessarily, you know, it's not necessarily about finding out things about this woman that people don't know to sort of unlock her. She was so there. It was sort of, it was very emotionally stimulating. It connected me to her as a real person. I you know, obviously I love Mary Lou. The character is very vivid, and she jumps right off the page. She smacks you in the face. It's like, you know, with her tongue, like not in a bad way. So it's like, I think it was more about, you know, she never sold herself. That was one thing about her that was really very, very different to everyone involved in that movement. She wasn't rebelling against anything. She was so just being herself and didn't really want to partake in, or didn't really understand the importance. It wasn't her priority to be a part of something that was moving other people. It was just about the people that she loved. And I think that she's so completely human. In a way, like, she never made herself a commodity. You know, she really did kind of have, I think if you were to choose one character that really truly embodied this spirit of this book, it was her. And one thing that was really great was Jerry Nicosia came, who wrote Memory Babe. He came with these tapes, hours and hours and hours of her voice, that when we heard it, suddenly she had a voice. She was so infectious. It was like, suddenly we were so all completely in love with her. When you have that responsibility, like, you know, it's different when a character is written and they feel whole, and it's your job to either bring them to life or murder them on the page and deprive everyone of experiencing that person. But it's really another thing when I genuinely felt like I could look up in a moment where I wasn't getting somewhere, or in a moment where I was feeling like I was reaching too hard, too desperately, and I felt her. And I would never have had that without her daughter or those tapes. And she really is this amazing link between the two boys that, you know, it's a grand statement to make, but might not have happened without her. So, yes.
Ms. Dunst?
Well, I was lucky because Carolyn wrote a book called Off the Road, so even some of my dialogue is in the film and was written into the script. So for me, I haven't met Carolyn yet in person. I missed the opportunity, sadly, but I think that, you know, she was trying to live a normal life and kind of got caught up in you know, what they were doing and suffered for it, but was always, you know, I think someone who's very strong, very smart, and could have done a lot had she had followed another path. So, but her book is actually really, really great, and that is kind of what I based my choices on in the film.
Viggo?
Just add one little tiny thing.
Sorry.
The transcription of the tapes that we listened to is now a book. Jerry Nicosia put it together, and Marie Santos also wrote a little bit in the end, and it's called One and Only, and it is so important, and I can't believe that it exists now only because we were able to rediscover those tapes, and yeah, so if anyone's interested, the book is absolutely amazing.
Viggo?
Well, I came to the project later than most everyone, so I didn't get the benefit of the boot camp, but Walter was very generous in terms of, you know, well, obviously the script is very good, but just ideas about a balance between Bully and Burroughs, the character is based on. I had read the book, you know, when I was 17, 18, and I'd read it a couple times since. But like a lot of things, with the passage of time, the book, you know, I mean, something that's written down, unless you revive it by rereading it, reimagining it, performing it, it's a dead thing. You know what I mean? And so I had this, I felt I understood the book. I had an idea of the period, you know, which, and the beats, and, you know, I'd read a lot of Burroughs already, was familiar with him, Ginsberg, Kerouac, Corso, you know. But you have to reread it to make it live again. And reading the book again, which was the first thing I did, made me realize how pertinent it is now. I mean, there's a lot of, you know, protest movements, mass movements, especially by young people, in Europe, in North America, in China, Middle East, largely led by young people that, you know, that carry the spirit of that time. Because in a lot of ways, you know, out of fear, out of insecurity, economic crisis, you know, all over the world, I think times are quite conservative now. And there's a similar kind of rejection by young people today of, you know, people who are just saying, well, why not do it? Why not say it? You know, why is it this way? You know, rejection of the status quo, of sort of received authority. People are saying, no, I don't think so. I don't think we should bail out the banks. I don't think this. I don't think that. There's a lot of questioning going on now. So I think that even though I guess it must have been hard for Roman and his dad and other people to wait 30 years, it's probably a great time for this to come out now, because I think people will look at it, not just older people or people of my generation, people who lived through it, people who were just after, like me, who read it, you know, in the 70s, with a sort of nostalgic look at the book and the period, post-war U.S., North America. But young people will discover this book and identify with it, I think, in a very strong way. And as far as, you know, hanging the character, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, obviously, rereading the book, rereading a lot of Burroughs. I mean, I wanted to sort of get since there wasn't, what I liked about the book is that there's a freedom in the interpretation, which I think was appropriate. You know, Walter was talking about that. Appropriate to Kerouac, appropriate to the energy of these people that are in the story, that you have to make it your own. You have to bring it alive in your own way. And so I thought, well, there was a couple things that I wondered about going into it. How is it going to be made? Is it going to be just a sort of Americana picture that's safe and that you can put in a box, or is it going to make you ask questions about now? Are these characters going to be, you know, are the actors, are we going to do something that's our own, something new with these characters? And I think that's what Walter encouraged us to do, which was really good. It would have been a mistake to do some kind of, there are a lot of directors, maybe even good ones, who would have done a kind of cardboard cutout version of the book, and a lot of purists or whatever, I don't know, might have liked it. It could have been very beautifully photographed, etc. Well, this was beautifully photographed, but what was happening was real and what seemed alive to me when I saw the movie. The other thing I wondered is, are the darker aspects of the story going to be glossed over, you know? The effect of taking lots of drugs, of not sleeping, driving too fast, smoking cigarettes, and what are the women going to be like, you know, that get left behind, that are, you know, left pregnant, and, you know, it's not all roses, you know, the story, and, you know, some directors might have looked away from that or minimized it, but I thought that Walter balanced it really well. It's disturbing sometimes, the movie, as beautiful it is, and as much as you get into the flow of it. You know, I found that when I watched the movie, I haven't seen the finish, I saw a rough version, but after a few minutes, I didn't ask any questions about the book or any of the characters. I just was with it. It was kind of like a musical piece, which is exactly right, because it feels that way when you read the book. It just felt like music. It felt like boom, boom. It was going, it was going, it was going. It had these lows, these highs, dark periods, frenetic periods, sometimes almost just too much, and then there's moments of calm, but it sort of like Neil Cassidy, it never quite stops completely, you know. It passes out once in a while, but it keeps going somehow. I mean, I can't say enough about how well made it was, and I think it was worth the wait. So.
And just to complete the round of actors, then I promise you I'll keep my mouth shut.
I'd like to add...
yeah, go ahead.
Just two observations to what Viggo has beautifully said. First one has to do with the fact that those characters in the book have the courage to experience everything in the flesh, à fleur de peau, as we would say in France, and not vicariously through a screen. And I think that this gained a lot of importance today as well, because the only way you can develop a critical perception of the world is through the personal experience. So this is what also relayed the book to a very contemporary feeling for me, just adding up to everything else that I completely concur to that Viggo brought. But I would also like to use this moment to talk about the actors as co-authors of this film. And Viggo, for instance, arrived in New Orleans when we shot the bully scenes, having no, you didn't bring the flag, but Viggo did bring not only the costumes of the character, the guns that Bully or Burroughs would use at the time, the typing machine that we would use, but he also had made an incredible research on what he was reading at the time in 1949. It happened to be the Mayan codes, and he was revisiting Céline. So the improvisation around Céline, the scene about Céline in the film, is an improvisation brought by Viggo. He also brought some children's book from 1949. So when you have the Amy Adams character reading, you know, those stories, they are also improvised thanks to what Viggo has brought to the project. And in doing so, I think we were trespassing the book in a way, but we were being very faithful to it in the sense that more than anything else, Kerouac was looking for the constant improvisation and the cult of spontaneity. And this is what we brought to it. Thanks to what every actor, you know, was able to bring. Every single actor in this in this table here brought elements that changed the course of the shoot.
Except
something. Can I just add one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Just to end up, it's. I hope that Viggo will pardon me for saying that. But the very last day of the shoot, we finished at like 3 a.m. and Viggo said, "I'm going to give you a ride," and so and we're going to talk a little bit. And in fact, we were 45 minutes away from New Orleans, and we entered the car. and Viggo puts on a CD, and it was Burroughs speaking. So we didn't exchange a word for 45 minutes. We just listened to Burroughs, and that was at the end of the last day of the shoot. So this shows how much research has been done, and how much Viggo was really paying a tribute to Burroughs in doing Bully.
Now, the last two actors we haven't heard from yet, Mr. Morgan and Mr. Sturridge. Al Hinkle, who is sort of physically lesser known to us all. Did you,
like me?
Did you have the feeling that because no one particularly knew his face or his physicality, you had a free hand? And whereas Tom Sturridge, who has to play Allen Ginsberg, who has a very specific and distinctive look as we know it now, you had to invent the look, the Ginsberg look, before the Ginsberg look. Or am I being too French?
I mean, I don't think we had to invent it. I mean, I just think that the sort of the image of Alan that permeates the universe is a sort of Buddha in San Francisco, 50-year-old man surrounded by hippies. But there's, in fact, a lot of images of him when he was 18, 20, which we used. And so, I mean, it wasn't a reinvention. It was just access to the truth. And I mean, as the extraordinary thing about him is he wrote so much as a child and as a young man, and his sort of literary juvenilia is published. And there's a book called The Book of Martyrdom and Artifice. And so you can read, during the period of On the Road, you can read the poetry he was writing and the descriptions of his dreams and his diary entries about his interactions and experiences with these people. And so, as far as the hook that we're all talking about, I felt extraordinarily intimate with him because of that kind of sort of naked expression.
Well, Al Hinkle definitely wasn't ginger, that's for sure, so we got rid of that. But I was lucky enough to actually meet Al Hinkle, and it was amazing. It was at the rap party. It was really surreal. I kind of felt like the world was going to implode if I actually met him.
We Skyped with him too, though.
Yeah, he Skyped in at the beginning.
He was our Benzendrine teacher, yes.
Yeah, he taught these guys how to take drugs. Fake drugs. And then I got to meet him at the rap party, and it was amazing. We had a big chat. It was kind of like I was being set up on a really strange blind date. People were going, he's over there, go and talk to him. So I was kind of ushered towards him and then pushed in front of him. But then we kind of settled down and talked for a long time, and he was an amazing guy. And we shared a love of food. And he spoke a lot about his wife and stuff, and it was amazing. But that was after the film, so I really had no idea what I was doing during this film.
We'll have finally a question over there, then here, then here, then here. Go ahead.
Good morning. I have a question for Ms. Stewart. In the Twilight series, you play a character who insists not having sex before marriage, and here your character does.
She really wants to.
Right. What kind of thinking process did you have to go through before first accepting this role and then acting in those scenes, for example, in the car scene? And secondly, since both you and Mr. Pattinson have a...
That's wrong movie. Wrong movie. Right. Do you want to ask? Okay. Ms. Stewart.
Okay. I was 16, 17 maybe when I spoke with Walter for the first time, and as soon as I sat in front of him, we knew we loved it for the same reasons, and that was it. And I'm very happy that I was able to age a couple of years before we shot the film. Even though Luann was 16 when she started this journey, I was a younger 16, I think, when I was that age. and I don't know, everything felt so completely. Obviously, everyone who does scenes like that, the first thing you say is, "Oh, I felt so safe. Walter put me in an environment that was very informed by the natural story." But I love pushing. I love scaring myself, and I think to watch genuine experience on screen is just so much more interesting than seeing. You can see the tape holding up the pasties, or like you can see that. You know, I wanted to do it. The reason I want to do the job is because, you know, you read something, you're provoked on some level, and then it's just taking that further and being able to live it. And I always want to get as close to the experience as I possibly can. And in this case, I didn't have a thought in my mind. Like, I think we really were just going forth. It was always about going forward, and so as long as you're always being really honest, there's nothing ever to be ashamed of. And yep.
Thank you. Question here.
Good morning, Peter Hall from the Toronto Star. It's a question for Walter Salles, and also I'd like to hear from Kristen and Kirsten. Something Viggo touched on about the darkness of the book. There's a real streak of misogyny in it, and also of sadness, and I'm glad you didn't shy away from that. But I was wondering whether the people of today may judge these characters more harshly now than they would have in the 50s, and what you're thinking of, particularly the women, the way the men treated the women, not well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that we try to develop the Mary Lou character and the Camille character beyond the book, and in this sense, having encountered Caroline Cassidy was so fundamental, and having listened also to the Luan tapes that Nicosia brought was also fundamental. Caroline Cassidy is a brilliant woman, a brilliant writer in her own right as well, and she even had an influence in the dialogues of the film, because at one point, as we became friends and I got back to London where she lives a few times, one day she said, "You know what I think he was looking when he started to date me?" And I said no, and she said, "Respectability. That's in the film. It's not in the book." You see, so we try to incorporate more and more elements that would give those women character a three-dimensional quality that maybe you couldn't find in the book. But I don't completely agree with you because the scroll has much more information about these women than the edited version that was published in 1957 has. What you may also have noticed is that in the book, when the camera leaves with the boy, when Camille, for instance, has the fight in San Francisco with Dean and expels the two boys from the house, in the book you stay with the boys. In the film, we stay with her. And we stay with her because there are consequences to acts that you have to account for. And I thought it was, very gripping to see that, this woman, Camille, had a master's degree in theater in the late 40s, which was very unique at the time. And yet, she was working as a nurse to be able to take care of her children. And I wanted to show that in the book. Identically, you talked about loss also, the sense of loss and gravity. When you take the road, I've done several road movies, and I realized through doing them that, the more you get distant from your roots, from the starting point, the more you possibly gain perspective on who you are, where you come from, and eventually who you want to be. But you're also losing part of yourself. You're also letting part of yourself behind. And you see that dichotomy pretty well in the Saul character, because he's very much taken by the igniter of the story, That's Dean Moriarty, which is a character who was so influential not only for Kerouac, but he also influenced Ginsberg's work. There are beautiful poems, written on Neal Cassady, and a great novel, which is Go by John Clennon Holmes as well. At some point, at the very end of the book, you realize that this is a story about a broken friendship when they depart in the street, But this is also narrative about a book being written about all of those stories. And when the book ends, and this has always moved me since I read it when I was 18 in Brazil, the fact that the book, after that ruptura, that's la rupture, how do you say that in English? The
breakup.
After the breakup between these two characters at the very end of the film, the fact that Sal writes that he remembers Neal Cassady, he remembers, Dean Moriarty. He even remembers the old Dean Moriarty, the father they never found. Remember Dean Moriarty, I remember Dean Moriarty. I think about Dean Moriarty, I think about Dean Moriarty. The simple echo of that memory shows that that character will stay forever in the book. Even if the friendship is not there anymore, it is immortalized in the book. So yes, the pain of the existence is there, but also the possibility to transcend it through art, through literature, is also there. And in this lies, I think, the beauty of the film, because it may be very painful to see what happens to these men and women. It is also about the end of the road, the end of the dream, as Annie Charters says. But it's also about a book that is still being read today. I was in the plane coming down here, and the two guys sitting near me were reading on the road. And I'll take this opportunity to say that for a filmmaker, but also for all of us who are here, the most beautiful thing that could happen is the fact that young viewers may be able now to read this book at 17 or 18 as we all read it, and have the same passion that ignited our own journey. Right?
No, I'm afraid our time is up. Sorry, you guys, but our time is up. Thank you all very much for being here.